Representative Fincham, distinguished senators and representatives, thank you very much for giving us this opportunity to be heard. It's been difficult getting an opportunity to be heard. It shouldn't be. It's America, after all. And our side of the story is legitimate. Our side of the story needs to be heard. And it's been uniformly censored by big tech, big media, the crooked Democrats, and basically people who are saying, don't show us the facts. We've decided already that this is a free and fair election. It was done perfectly. Please don't interrupt that narrative with the truth. Well, we're going to interrupt that narrative this morning with the truth. I have with me Jenna Ellis, who's my co-counsel, representing the President of the that you want. Colonel Waldron, did you have the opportunity to examine any of the Dominion machines that were used in this election?
Yes, sir. Our team looked at some machines and software up in Michigan. So
you know that Dominion machines were used in Maricopa County to count the vote?
Correct.
And they were also used in Michigan?
Michigan, Georgia, Pennsylvania.
And the machines that you observed, took a look at, were able to examine, were used in the Michigan vote?
Correct.
Now tell us a little about Dominion. Dominion is a company that makes voting machines and voting calculation machines?
That's correct. They've got full end-to-end election, equipment and software.
And the actual software in the Dominion machine, is that Dominion software or is it someone else's?
Dominion is more of a hybrid. Over the years, they've acquired other voting companies, Sequoia and Premier. Sequoia was spun off of SGO, and Premier was spun off of DISTILLED as a result of the antitrust lawsuit.
Sequoia is the company that was involved in the very serious miscalculation of the Chicago vote in 2007, wasn't it?
I believe that's correct, yes, sir.
And they were using Smartmatic software, right?
Correct. And the software, the licensing agreements are pretty well, it's a good spider chart for all of these companies. They all share a common DNA in the software code.
And that company, Smartmatic, their roots are in Venezuela, isn't that right?
Yes, sir. Hugo Chavez was one of the founders, and invested, I think, 28% ownership in the initial setup of the SGO election systems.
And they have been involved in several South American elections that were fixed, altered?
Argentina, Bolivia, Singapore, Venezuela, Italy, several.
And just to simplify things, and we can make this available to you, and we have several witnesses that go back to that period of time who were involved in the vote fixing, who have looked at the vote pattern in Arizona and elsewhere and said that the pattern matches the way in which Dominion and Smartmatic, companies like that, fix votes. Isn't that right?
Yes, sir.
And well, let me ask you this other question. One of the former officials of the United States government, a gentleman named Chris Krebs, the former DHS official, shortly after the election, he made an announcement that many of these people refusing to take a look at any evidence are relying on. What did he say?
Mr. Krebs was the director of CISA at DHS, and he basically said that this election was the most secure in history.
The most what?
Most secure in history.
The most secure in history.
And partially that was because the states do an excellent job of validating voter rolls, and that this equipment is not connected to the internet. That was in his.
He said this equipment, which was largely Dominion and several others, is not connected to the internet. that correct?
Yes, sir.
Now, is Dominion on his council?
Dominion was on Mr. Krebs' Election Security Advisory Council.
And is there, and we'll get to it, we'll witness it, is there substantial evidence, not only here in Arizona, but in other states like what we presented in Pennsylvania, that Dominion was in fact connected to the internet?
Are you referring to information other than the user's manual?
Well, let's go back to the user's manual. Tell them about the user's manual.
The Dominion Suite user's manual is about 1.5 inches thick. My team went back to the user's manual and looked at all the instances where in the user's manual it tells operators to connect the Ethernet cords to the router, and it is the systems are connected to the internet.
And then what evidence do you have that there actually was connection to the internet?
Our teams looked at spider graphs of the Dominion network on election day and showed the increased web traffic, internet traffic on election day for Dominion servers.
So on election day, Dominion was communicating by internet,
Correct.
contrary to what Mr. Krebs said or thought.
The voting systems in the U.S. and Arizona, Dominion, and several of the other machines were built to be manipulated. And as the mayor said, they've been used in elections around the world with questionable results. And we believe that these same questionable results are present in this election. Again, my background as an information warfare officer is how to get in and corrupt these machines to conduct strategic influence operations. How do I get the enemy or a targeted population in a foreign country to think and act a certain way? These machines have multiple points of injection that are vulnerable, everywhere from the server level, where passwords, accesses are posted for the dark web for any hacker to get in and access them. And what they can do at the far right limit is download CSV files or like an Excel spreadsheet, change the columns and re-upload them. And that can be done at the server level. At the operator level, if there's software, it can be corrupted, it can be manipulated. With a device that is as small and as simple as a USB device, which these machines are booted up and run off of. So the little bit of history, and I can show you some charts on the DNA of these machines, but the common software goes back to SGO Smartmatic. As the mayor mentioned, they sold Sequoia voting systems to Dominion in 2010, and then Diebold spun off the Premier election system to Dominion as a result of the antitrust concerns. I believe that was also in 2010. So the bottom line is that these systems all have similar code and similar functions, and it's displayed in their operator's manual. So, I know it's kind of been, in the press, it's kind of been poo-pooed that, this doesn't go back to Hugo Chavez. But I personally debriefed the son of a Cuban intelligence officer who had firsthand knowledge, speaking with two of Hugo Chavez's family members, that in the Maduro election, when the populist uprising threatened Venezuela's totalitarian leadership, that Hugo Chavez's family members said that don't worry, that it's guaranteed that their father invested the money to build the SGO voting machines system. So in a nutshell, these systems are not what you've been told, if you've been told anything. They are connected to the internet. There is no transparency of how the voter information is processed, moved, and stored. And as a matter of fact, these companies have refused to allow any type of inspection into their code, and they always decry, it's our IP, it's IP protection. The voting record is able to be modified, deleted, adjusted by administrators or outside threats, and those are also explained in the user's manual. Operators can assign votes for write-in votes, blank or error ballots, in large numbers. So all of these votes, they could get put into a batch file, and then the administrator of that voting or tabulation system can say, okay, there's 8,000 votes in this batch file, or there's 5,000 votes in this batch file, and they can say, well, I think, this batch will just make this go to this candidate, and they have that they have that authority in the user's manual to do that. Our team is not the only team that's working on this. There are literally hundreds of other small cyber teams that have weighed in on this. There are tons of statisticians. You'll hear from some of your Arizona citizens today, but we've been working in several states looking at these anomalies. But it's not a secret. DEF CON last year, I think the hacking teams broke in and manipulated these machines in under 2 minutes. One of our white hat hackers discovered a malware on the server. It's called the Q-Snatch, that basically records login credentials and passwords. So if someone in Philadelphia, or someone in Maricopa County, or someone in Antrim, Michigan logged in, that malware will grab their username and password. And so you can log in. If you got access to the backside of that malware, you can log in wherever you are in the world to Maricopa County to manipulate.
Nor have you. This evidence is being submitted to dispute the lies that Dominion and Smartmatic are putting out, which is their machines are perfect, their machines can't be tampered with, their machines are tamper-proof. The reality is their machines are just the opposite. They're completely vulnerable. Is that right, Colonel?
And if you look up on the screen, that's exactly what, let me see if I can, do I need to put this at full screen, or is it a better view?
I think you need to explain it.
So this is a Spiderfoot reconnaissance tool that looked at DominionVoting.com network that was analyzed on November 3rd. And basically this shows vulnerabilities. It shows volumetric internet traffic, the raw data. It shows all of the web servers, physical coordinates, all the vulnerabilities that are associated with the server. But basically, it does show that this was connected to the internet on voting day, and the volume of traffic was significant, and the vulnerabilities there are plenty of vulnerabilities that. So this is sort of a historical link to all the voting companies, and we got Smartmatic in the middle. It's a licensor to Dominion Voting Systems. Seidel runs election night reporting through SOE software and Clarity Elections over here. And Clarity Elections is, if you click up on a lot of the county and Secretary of State voting systems, matter of fact, on the Frankfurt server on election day, there was a German cybersecurity professor that was noting that the increase in traffic was, and he related it back to COVID and said, we haven't even hit our indoors winter season yet, and we've hit the highest traffic. And he specifically noted that one of the reasons was the American elections. It went from 7 point something terabytes a second to 10 terabytes, so it went to a lot of, a pretty big increase, not an exponential though. So we noticed a difference in Arizona versus the other states. Our team mostly focused on what we call spike analysis, which were an electronic inject of a lot of votes, and where the number of votes that were injected in a specific time period exceeded the ability of the scanners to process ballots and upload. So basically, it's a signal of a potential anomaly where we would want to go in and do forensic analysis on the ballots that were processed in those batches to analyze. The way that these systems work is that you can run votes in, run votes in, run votes in, and if you get write-in ballots or error ballots, it just accumulates them into a batch file. And there may be, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 votes in this batch file, and then the administrator or the tabulator can just go, okay, I'm ready to process batch file, bloop, and they send it, and then it records those votes. In the user's manual, there's ways that it shows that the administrator can vote that batch, you know, in a 80%, 20%, 100%, however the administrator chooses. And that basically is a tool to allow them to move votes through the system faster. So Arizona was a little bit different. It had a pretty strong rise right up at the front, the first part of voting day, whereas the other states, and I can show you those, have a gradual increase in votes. And this may have been due to the fact that Arizona allowed early counting and tabulation, so those batch files could have been dropped in right away. But this injection spike at 8:06:40 p.m., and this is adjusted from Zulu time, so this is 143,100 votes that were injected. That was in excess of what the machines could have processed. The real reason that we believe that this spike was a little bit of an anomaly, and should I show the email that was sent to the Arizona legislature?
You have the floor, sir.
Say again?
Yes.
So this was an anonymous email that was sent to all members of the Arizona legislature, and it was also sent to DOJ. This individual sent the email, wanted to remain anonymous, but had enough concern that he sent this to the criminal division of U.S. Department of Justice. He did not want to be included in the investigation, but the information that they recorded was what we would like the opportunity to investigate on your behalf, or a forensics team of your choosing. It doesn't matter to us, but it says that please be advised that Pima County Recorder, located at 240 North Stone Avenue, Tucson, Arizona, in Pima County, Arizona, and the Democratic Party added fraud votes in the initial count to the vote by mail totals released at 8 p.m. on November 3rd, 2020. So this coincides with what we observed in the data analytics at that spike. We weren't aware of this until this email until after the fact. So there were approximately 35,000 fraud votes added to each Democratic candidate's vote totals. Candidates impacted include county, state, and federal election candidates. Through the utilization of the automated ballot count machines in Pima County elections, which were not Dominion, but they had the same pretty much functionality. My understanding is that 35,000 was embedded into each Democrat vote totals. Below are the meeting notes. In a meeting I was invited to by the Democrat Party in Pima County, Arizona on September 10th, 2020, no phones or recording devices were allowed. A presentation was given including detailed plans to embed 35,000 in a spread configured distribution to each Democrat candidate's vote totals. When I asked how in the world that will 35,000 votes be kept hidden from being discovered, it was stated that spread distribution will be embedded across the total registered voter range and will not exceed the registered vote count. And the 35,000 was determined allowable for Pima County based on our county registered vote count. It was also stated that total voter turnout versus total registered voters determine how many votes we can embed. This embedding will auto-adjust based on voter turnout. Because the embed votes are distributed sporadically, all embedded votes will not be found. If audited, because the embeds are in groups of approximately 1,000. This is so county recorder can declare an oversight issue or error as groups of 1,000 is a normal and acceptable error. So if you believe that your one vote counts for one vote, this is Maricopa County's embed totals will be substantially higher than Pima due to embeds being calculated based on the total number of registered voters. When I asked, has this ever been tested and how do we know it works? The response was yes. This has been tested and has shown significant success in Arizona judicial retention elections since 2014. Even undetectable in post-audits, because no candidate will spend the kind of funds needed to audit and contact voters to verify votes in the full potential of total registered voters, which is more than 500,000 registered voters. This year, our Secretary of State has removed precinct level detail for election night releases so candidates can't see precinct overvotes. This is what I have from the meeting. Just thought I'd report this. Not sure if you can do anything since I was unable to have a recording device in the meeting. Again, Maricopa County had a 1.9 million mail-in ballot requests. So, and those, there was a Maricopa County official on videotape that did say that they did not validate the signatures on the write-in ballots this year. So that's a 1.9 million vote fraud potential, even if it's 0.1% of the vote. There's a lot of room for error.
Sure. My name is Matt Brainerd. I'm the leader of the Voter Integrity Project, looking into anomalies and potential illegal ballots cast in this election in the 6 pivotal states, including Arizona. I have a background working in voter data going back over 20 years. I and a team of dedicated individuals with experience similar to my own in the field of voter data and analysis decided to engage in an experiment of sorts to detect potentially illegal ballots without any preconceived notions about what we might find, what we want to find, just to try to determine the truth using a couple of different analytical methods. And we entered this with although many of us have political biases, personally, we brought none of those biases to our analysis. We just decided we wanted to try to find the truth using methods we believe to be reliable. Our findings were across the country. We found a tremendous number of anomalies, and Arizona is at the forefront of many of the anomalies we found. Now, unlike many other states that we evaluated, there were some unique limitations to our analysis in Arizona. In general, we were only able to get data for early and absentee voters in all of the 6 states we targeted. In Arizona, we were only able to get early and absentee voters for the county of Maricopa. So all the numbers I'm sharing with you, all of the analysis is based solely on Maricopa. Now, as the other counties make their data available, we'll certainly try to update these reports and these numbers. But just looking at Maricopa, we found some interesting results. So I'm going to open up a PowerPoint that kind of covers the country, but I'm really just going to speak about Arizona, which is, I know what you're interested in. So we ran 5 or 6 different experiments on each of these states. One experiment that we ran where we isolated a universe of voters according to the state who had been sent an absentee ballot but did not return that ballot. And we asked them 2 questions. One, we asked them, by reaching out to them via phone, because we were operating 3 different call centers to try to reach these people to confirm whether or not they had ever requested that absentee ballot and whether or not they returned it. So in Arizona, we were able to reach 2,044 people who had been identified as having requested an absentee ballot and not returned it, according to the state. Of them said they never requested that ballot. Then, among the individuals who did say they did request it, we asked, well, did you send it back? And among those, of the overall universe, we had 354 of them say, yeah, I actually mailed it back, despite the state not recording having received it back. Now, I've got a little bit of audio-visual for you because our call centers were recording phone calls. Now, none of this is speculative. I know that some people have, other analysts in some of the court cases I've been involved in have taken our numbers and then projected them. Say, for example, projecting that 44% of the did not request of our sample out to the entire universe of about 500,000 unreturned, and saying these are the number of ballots that it seems or appears possible that somebody else requested those ballots other than the voter of record. But I'm not doing that myself. Others are welcome to make that analysis. I don't have a background as a statistician. In Arizona, we actually pulled a universe of people who had never voted before, except they've showed up and voted this election. And just call them and say, hey, did you actually cast that ballot? It's very hard. Any of you who've, I'm sure in your maybe races for office, have operated phone centers or conducted public polling, when you start out with a universe that's pretty big, once you start trying to dial that and get responses, that universe shrinks a lot. So we did this experiment in Arizona with some again, voters who'd never voted before, again, and asked them if they had cast that ballot. Now, about 1% of them told us that they didn't. But remember, those were people willing to talk to us and admit that they did not cast a ballot. And many of the people we reached, we had to leave voice messages for. We just couldn't get a hold of. But one person in particular, I want to play a video for you guys, who we left him a voicemail, but he never talked to us, so he's not included in these numbers. So I want to share just a clip, if I can, from a program. Let me adjust the volume here.
Maricopa County, Arizona to Tennessee about 5 months ago so he could train for the Olympics. So you can imagine his surprise when he got a message from something called the Voter Integrity Fund.
The state of Arizona is reporting that a ballot was cast in the name of Nishan Garrett in the general election on Tuesday. If Nishan Garrett did not cast this ballot, please call us back.
Well, that doesn't sound fishy at all, right? Well, Nishan didn't think so either. So he went to the state of Arizona's voting website only to discover that his ballot had been accepted. And Maricopa County's voter portal said his ballot was signature verified and counted. The only problem is he'd already voted in Tennessee. He didn't vote in Arizona. Nishan Garrett joins me now. Nishan, great to see you. Now, you never received an Arizona absentee ballot or an application for mail-in ballot. So who the heck cast your ballot in Arizona?
That is an excellent question.
Actually going to play for you another recording here.
Hi, can you confirm whether or not you cast a ballot in the state of Arizona?
I'm a felon, so I can't vote.
All right. Let's see here. According to the state of Arizona, somebody cast a ballot in your name and you may be a victim of voter fraud. Can you...
We, at great expense, obtained a national voter file. And we used it to determine people who may have been registered here, moved to another state, registered to vote there, I believe invalidating their residency or inability to vote here, and then cast a ballot back here because, we all have anecdotes, right? We've all heard crazy stories. But what we did is we took our national voter file and looked at registration dates there. And then we looked at the registration dates of people we matched it to in Arizona, where they moved from Arizona to California, for example, registered to vote there, and then decided they shopped their ballot, potentially, or they had the ballot cast in their name, and decided, you know what, my vote might count more in Arizona than it does in California, swing state. So we were able to identify these individuals who had a subsequent registration out of state, but cast their early absentee here. Again, just Maricopa County and just early absentee, no election day. We also did an NCOA analysis. And when people move from one state to another, the Postal Service sort of tracks that. Often people fill out an NCOA card saying, I've moved here, please forward my mail. It's a pretty good indicator. They've established residency somewhere else. And we found among this population a substantial number who NCOA to another state, but cast their ballot here. Now, when we combine those numbers together for your state and we merge, and we take out some that we estimate to have been military moves, which they don't actually lose their ability to vote in the state, we came up with a total of about 5,700 or so, and just Maricopa, just early absentees. I would say there's two levels of confidence I have, okay? The first level of confidence is very, and I am very confident that we get very close to that number when we take the residency issues and then apply it to the other counties for which we weren't able to obtain data. The second level of confidence is where you take a number of projection. We go back out to low activity analysis and NCO analysis, which I'm not going to get in the weeds, but these are basically people telling us that they had votes, that they didn't cast votes that were cast in their name. If you're comfortable projecting these numbers to the population that we were trying to reach via phone that we just couldn't, I think then you reach another level of certainty that you're able to bridge that gap. So I think that I have a high degree of confidence that the number of ballots that were cast that should not have been cast, illegal ballots, surpasses the margin of victory as it stands right now.
It's Rudy Giuliani. How are you?
How are you, Mayor Giuliani?
Can I just ask you, how did you get to that calculation where Trump received minus 30% of the Democrat vote? Can you explain to us in a way that we can understand how you got to that calculation?
Sure. So let me go back to it, if I can go back to it. So think of this, Mayor Giuliani, as if you think about this, this is a curve that represents the actual vote, what's called the cumulative vote count for Mr. Biden and President Trump. Okay, so this is the control. This is what actually occurred on election night. Does that make sense? And what we're attempting to do in mathematics, using mathematics, you can do what's called curve fitting, where you can change certain variables to attempt to fit this curve. The variables we are changing here, which cannot be done, manually, but the computer is essentially changing the possibilities of different levers, a percentage of Democrats who voted for President Trump, the percent of Democrats who voted for Mr. Biden, the percent of Republicans who voted for Biden, the percent of Republicans who voted for Trump, the percent of independents who voted for Biden, the percent of independents who voted for Trump, and so on. So it's a solving where, remember in algebra where you could multiply variables by different equations, and you're trying to match this curve. So the computer is doing this, Mayor Giuliani, and so that's why I'm showing you these different possibilities. Now there's hundreds of thousands that the computer is running through to figure out what possible, as you can see here, what possible combination of these would lead to this. And the only one we were able to find was this. I hope that explains it. We're looking at the computer trying to find combinations of these vote allocations that could perfectly reproduce this result.
So a vote for Biden would actually be 1 1/3 vote. Is that correct?
Yeah, 1 3/10, right. So
1 3/10.
So when Biden got one vote,
1 3/10, and a vote for
Yeah.
Trump would be 1.
a vote for Trump would be whatever the president got, if he got 100 votes, reduced by 30% of what Mr. Biden got. Basically, the president's vote is linked to the vote that Mr. Biden got. So if Biden got 100 votes and his went up by 1.3, which means it took 30% of the votes were reduced that would go to President Trump. So basically, votes are being eaten from President Trump and handed over to Mr. Biden. That's the only way to, one possibility of explaining.
Did you discuss this at all with Colonel Waldron?
I received a text message from this earlier, and in preparation for this, I wasn't able to get to him, but I'm willing to discuss that with him.
Well, he reached a very similar conclusion in a different way, that the votes for Biden were valued within the computer algorithm as higher than the votes for Trump. Could you accomplish that within a computer that you had gotten control of?
Well, one of the important things to recognize is that what we do know is, starting in 2002, Mayor Giuliani, that these voting vendors, it was brought out in one of the Diebold manuals, have a feature called a weighted race feature. The weighted race feature, it's a documented feature. And the weighted race feature basically says that the feature in the software, which the secretaries of state have certified, knowingly or maybe unconsciously, but they must have certified these electronic voting system software, has a feature called a weighted race feature, which allows a voter's vote to be, or a candidate's votes to be multiplied. So what that means is the central principle Justice Earl Warren ruled on in 1964, one person, one vote, or clarified that, can be violated. It can be one person, not one vote. And that is one explanation of this. But the important feature I think people in the public need to understand is these software systems, the electronic voting software systems, have a documented feature called a weighted race feature. So the implementation of this is very possible. In fact, it's a documented feature starting as early as 2002. Voted for President Trump, approximately, we're becoming 7/10 of a vote.
Do you know if the Dominion machines have that weighted vote feature?
As I understand, if the fact that the votes are stored as decimal fractions means you could have external programs intersect, communicate with those programs and alter them using external software programs, which could also do weighted race features. But the important element here is that there's documented features of the weighted race feature as early as 2002, and our votes are stored as decimal numbers.
Would I be overly simplistic if I concluded the only reason you would want a machine with a weighted vote feature is in order to cheat?
It's enabling cheating. It's an enabling of one person, not one vote.
I mean, this is not a poll.
That's what the feature enables.
This is not a poll. This is an absolute vote. And the only reason to have that feature would be if you're going to distort the vote.
Exactly.
Wow.
Do you have any follow-up questions you'd like to ask?
I would just like the doctor to state his credentials.
Dr. Shiva, would you please state your credentials?
Sure. My name is Dr. Shiva Ayyadurai. I hold 4 degrees from MIT. My undergraduate is in electrical engineering and computer science. I have 2 other masters. One is in scientific visualization from the MIT Media Lab, my master's. I also hold another master's from MIT in mechanical engineering, and my PhD is in a field called computational systems biology.
And when you were at the Maricopa County election facility, where the ballots were received, validated, and processed, you were seated 25 feet in front of a room with 110 ballot processes. Could you see anything?
No. I mean, I could see the people, I could
No,
see
but
the room.
could you observe signatures or
Not at all.
envelopes?
They
or-
would not allow us to go beyond. I was sitting in a seat, and there was a pathway that was in front of me where they would actually bring the carts in that had the ballots in them in mail containers, and they would just go through that long aisleway and set them off on the side. Other than that, I was not able to talk to anybody, I was not able to see anything, I was not able to examine anything. So as a poll observer, I was really hindered by just being there and not being able to talk to anybody or see anything.
And what were they physically doing with the ballots?
Well, they were sitting at the tables. Again, there were 110 of them, so they were spread throughout.
110 tables.
Yes.
And how many observers?
And I would say the room was probably as large as this room.
How many observers? Republican observers?
Well, I was the only.
You were the
I was
only
the only poll
Republican observer.
on the Republican side. While I
For
was there,
110
110
tables?
processors.
110 tables?
No, 110 processors.
On how-
2 at a table, so there were probably about 55 tables.
55 tables, 110 processes.
And I was the only
and you-
Republican observer.
And
I'm Dr. Judith Burns. I'm a resident of Maricopa County. And I've been a public educator for 40 years at both the university and secondary levels of education. I was an observer at the Tabulation and Election Center on 2 occasions and a poll watcher in my community. I observed at the Election Center on 2 occasions, both in the signature verification room and in the ballot processing room. The first day I was in the signature verification room, I was a little bit, having never done this before, I was a little bit startled at the circumstances. I walked in, was set at a table, told to stay in that spot, and I was facing a room full of computers that all I could see was the back of them. There were some computers behind me, but no screeners there that day. There were maybe 8 or 9 people present that day. I couldn't see anything, and I was very disturbed by this, but wasn't really sure what to do. And in the bottom right-hand corner was a yellow banner. And I got into a position where I could see the yellow banner, which said low confidence. Then I started paying much closer attention to the signatures, thinking this didn't even make sense to me, because the signature on the ballot that was being compared to other signatures didn't even resemble in any way what they were comparing it to. They were completely illegible. They were just scribbles on the ballot. And there were 5 screeners screening low confidence ballots for an entire afternoon that I was in there. And I asked Celia what the low confidence said, and she said just not to worry about that, that this was a new program that they were testing. Oh, I did ask Celia what happened to those votes. Were they counted? And I may have already said this, I don't think I did, but she said, yes, they were counted. The other area that I was in the ballot processing room. We were in a room probably a little smaller than this. There had to have been 75 to 90 tables in there. There were 2 processors on each side of different parties, I was told. Again, I was probably as far away as that black curtain, and the room was this big. We couldn't see anything or really observe anything.
My name is Linda Brickman, and I want to thank you, all of you, legislators, chairman, and Mr. Mayor, for letting me come forward and be able to speak today. Effective November 12th, 2020, as the first vice chair of Maricopa County Republican Committee, the MCRC, by operation of law, upon the resignation of the chairman, I took over the performance of the chairman's duties. As a veteran county elections worker who actually worked the election both during the August primary and the general from 10/19/20 to 11/11/20, working on signature verification room, the duplication room, adjudication room, ABC room, and the hand count audit, let me share at least 6 irregularities that I personally observed. Number 1, signature verification standards were constantly being lowered by supervisors in order to move more quickly and process the higher amount of early and mail-in ballots from approximately 15 points of similarities, where you see a rounded L or a straight line, a number of different similarities that we were told through maybe an hour process of training prior to all this beginning. From the 15 points of similarities, reduced to a minimum of 3, lowered to 1, and ultimately none. Just past each signature verification through, we were told. Too many rejections have already been turned in and reviewed. We need to move more quickly. This is not the way an election should be run. Where's the integrity? 2, alleged signatures and challenged signatures on envelopes where the signature was completely different from the person and the name as a listed voter. These were let through and approved by supervisors. So the ones who signed the envelopes were not the actual voter, but these were allowed to go through with Maricopa County verified, stamped on the outside of each affidavit envelope. 3, challenged runs or batches of envelopes for signatures, verification observed by me to be the exact same handwriting on the affidavit envelopes. And these were on various ballots. I saved what was the ballot number, and I believe I've turned it in. If not, I do have that information, where there were at least 30 ballots that I saw at one time that were all signed by the same handwriting, but on different voters' names. When I asked the county attorney if the county attorney would be alerted for possible fraud, I was told no, but supervisors would take care of it. In the dupes room, number 4, and this is the duplication room, I observed with my Democratic partner the preparation of a new ballot since the original one was soiled or wouldn't go through the tabulators. I read her a Trump Republican ballot, and as soon as she entered it into the system, the ballot defaulted on the screen to a Biden Democratic ballot.
Just what I asked.
We reported this to the supervisors, and others in the room commented that they had witnessed the same manipulation. We were never told what, if any, corrective action was taken. All I know is the next day I was called outside the room that I was working in signature verification by the supervisor saying, I understand you caused some problems this week, and saying that you thought our machines were not working correctly. And I was being the one that was scolded. And I was told at that point in time, I could not discuss anything or talk about what was going on, as many people were threatened, because they were told that their voices would be suppressed. They would be either have to leave the room and not work there again. I'm here because I think this is our duty to speak the truth and tell the truth. Number 5, election office observers. When it became apparent that more and more early and mail-in ballots need to be processed, I mentioned that the current role of the number of observers per party was not adequate. 1 per party unless all parties agreed to more. And since the governor refused to call the legislature into session for whatever his reasons, and little incentive for the Democrats to agree to a higher adequate number, there was no way that 1 observer per party who were forced to the back of the room or to have to watch behind a closed-in wall or a see-through wall would have legitimate opportunity to see what election workers were actually seeing in real time and doing, especially where up to 20 or more workers processing tests, sometimes in 10 seconds or less. And I personally observed most observers acting clueless and did not believe any of them even recognize the challenges that I was referencing above. Number 6, one of the most egregious. In both the duplication and adjudication rooms, which I worked, I observed the problem of Trump votes with voters checking the bubble for a vote for Trump, but also writing in the name Donald Trump under the write-in candidate and checking the bubble next to his handwritten name again as a duplicated vote. And this would continue on as an overvote, which means no vote was counted at all, despite the policy having been changed to allow these overvotes. Supervisors contradicted their own policies where the intent was clear. Ray Valenzuela, Director of Elections, told me openly the morning of the Dominion certification, November 18th, 2020, that this was incorrect. The supervisors were terribly mistaken, and as an adjudicator, I was instructed incorrectly that these many votes should have been counted and not turned away as an overvote. Chairman Fincham, legislators, Mayor, I am here today, again, not as an expert in the Dominion software, but I'm here as a voter in Maricopa County who wants to hear and speak the truth, even though myself and many others have been suppressed to speak before you now.
Hey, would you like to have a closing statement?
Sure, and I would like Jenna Ellis to conclude it. I'll be very brief. I'll just review the facts.
Thank you, sir.
We had a long and very disturbing day. I didn't expect things to be this bad, frankly. It's a much worse situation than I realized before I came here. The fraud is much more blatant, more wide open. The whole situation with the Dominion machine is really a national security problem. If you think about it carefully, it's not just Arizona's problem, it's Michigan's problem and Pennsylvania's problem, but it's also the United States problem, that our votes are going overseas, whether they're connected to China or Venezuela or not. These machines are wide open. China, Russia know how to take information from us from machines far more sophisticated than these extremely poorly constructed devices. And I remember 4 years ago, we were really upset about the bogus charge of Russian collusion involving some emails that all turned out to be true. They weren't properly obtained, but the information in them turned out to be true, which people failed to realize. And the charge of Russian collusion turned out to be false. And now when we look back on it, the person who colluded with Russia was Hillary Clinton, and the person who got money from Russia was Joe Biden. Now we're facing not a false charge of collusion, we're facing multiple charges in multiple states of a unheard of in our history invasion of our sacred right to vote. We had a long session today, difficult session, and it began and ended pretty much the same way. It began with the colonel pointing out that the Dominion machines that you were using in Maricopa might as well just been wide open computers that anybody could hack into, anybody had access to. And just in case it was hard to do it, there's plenty of testimony that despite the fact that they said there were no connections to the internet, your counting rooms and voting rooms were filled with internet connections. And just in case, you might remember that chart on the wall that I can't understand with all those arrows and things like that. That's the traffic that was going on from your voting machines and your calculating machines to the rest of the world. So there's scientific proof that they were communicating hundreds of thousands of times, if not more. Check that. My arithmetic may be a little off, but it's somewhere between 750 and 800,000 votes. I'm sorry, that's a lot of votes. That goes beyond just determining the election between Trump and Biden. That's over. That's 10 million, that's 10,000 votes. This is having stolen an election from the people of Arizona. And they're going to say, well, if you cancel out the 769 votes, 769,000 votes, you're denying them the right to vote. No, you're not. You're reaffirming the right to vote of your other 4 million people who cast an honest ballot. We don't even know if these people exist. And I'm sure some of them don't even exist. So we're going to deprive living human beings of their franchise in order to preserve the franchise of people who maybe don't exist, maybe are illegal, maybe are felons, or maybe voted 10 times. There's no way to know. They completely flaunted the law and put us in a position where we have to conclude that these ballots are null and void. So I know it's really tough. Sometimes I know what you're facing because we face it every day. We face horrible threats, ridiculous things said about us. I have now come to the conclusion that I'm proud that I'm called those names by people like that. It makes me very proud of myself, and I think my mother and father, who both are dead but taught me to be a patriotic American, are proud of me also. So I don't really give a damn what they say. But I know you're like that too. I know you're all like that too, or you wouldn't be here. But you got a lot of colleagues that are not. And they're not necessarily bad people. They're people who want to make a living. They're people who don't want their families harassed. They're people that want the opportunity to just, get by every day and do something good. You got to convince them that this thing that we have, liberty and freedom and the right to vote and freedom of religion and freedom of speech, it's under attack all the time. From the beginning of our republic until now, it's under attack. Sometimes foreign enemies, sometimes domestic enemies, sometimes a combination of both. And it's impossible to tell who gets called upon to make sacrifices. You think of all the young men and women we've lost overseas. They were called upon to make a sacrifice, and other young men and women weren't. Well, right now, you're being called upon to make the sacrifice. The members of this legislature. The Constitution of the United States put the finger on you. Our founding fathers put the finger on you. You're our salvation. Article 2, Section 1, Clause 2 of the Constitution puts the finger of responsibility in preserving our right to vote on the legislature of Arizona. Not your governor, thank goodness. Not your Secretary of State, even more thank goodness. But it puts it on you. And for those who are afraid, look, I've dealt with human beings that I had to convince to testify against the Sicilian Mafia. I had to get them to testify against the 5 families. Had to get them to testify against Joe Bonanno in Tucson, Arizona.
Yes, sir, you
where
did.
the nuns actually threw me out of the hospital because he built the hospital. And I've sat there with men crying, and worse than that, because they felt they were going to die doing it. But they found the courage to do it, and after they did it, they felt so much better about themselves. What I would say to my colleagues is, and I mean this in the generic sense, just be a man or a woman, not a sniveling coward. You'll feel so much better. You'll feel so much better about yourself. There's nothing that elevates you more than an act of courage. And there's nothing that demeans you more than an act of cowardice. See if you can convince them of that. We need it so badly.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And it's very difficult to follow that, but I will also likewise encourage this legislature that the facts have been explained today. You have witnesses, you have the evidence, you had the claim, but now you have the proof. And with that, the law is on your side. The remedy is on your side, and it's in your hands. And so when you have attorneys, you have other fellow members, you have anyone else in the fake news media, whoever it is, telling you that you cannot act or that you should sit idly by and simply allow the certification to go through, that is absolutely false. And when our founding fathers, who themselves had an incredible act of moral courage that lasted for years, when they wrote the Declaration of Independence, they all unanimously signed it, pledging their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor. Yeah. And that has been the pledge of every American who has understood that they provided the mandate in the Constitution to protect and preserve liberty and freedom and the greatest country on the face of the earth that we experience as the United States of America today. And the reason that they provided the mechanism in Article 2, Section 1.2, is to give you, the state legislatures here in Arizona, and we would call on Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Georgia, Michigan, and Nevada, and possibly others, to recognize that you are the sole guardian to combat a corrupted election. And there was a purpose and a design for that. Because when the founders understood the separation of powers, when they understood that the human heart is corrupt, and they understood that there would always be attacks upon our liberty and freedom, they wanted to make sure that the will of the people in the selection of our president, our chief magistrate, would be vested in a body that is separate from that corruption and could look honestly at what happened and be fact finders. You have been fact finders here today. And the mayor and I have both practiced criminal law, me a little bit less than he has, just a few years behind him. And we have a standard in criminal law called beyond reasonable doubt. And every jury that I've spoken to, as both a prosecutor and then a criminal defense attorney, we have the definition of reasonable doubt. And it's a doubt that's not vague, imaginary, or speculative, but a doubt that causes a reasonable person to hesitate to act in matters of importance concerning themselves. Why is your governor and your Secretary of State not hesitating to act? There is more than reasonable doubt here on the certification of this election. There is so much evidence that we've been denied the opportunity to present in court that you've only heard a fraction of it today. And you don't have to have a standard beyond a reasonable doubt in order to reclaim your Article 2, Section 1.2 authority. The Constitution does not provide a standard of law. It simply empowers you to act. And I would encourage and argue and charge you that this was given expressly to you for the sole purpose of making sure that the people that you represent here in the great state of Arizona are not disenfranchised by corruption. The law is on your side, and also it's in accord with federal law. In the explanation and the packet that we gave to you earlier on the brief explanation of the law, it also is in accord with federal law. Section 2 of Title 8 provides that when any state has held an election for the purpose of choosing electors and has failed to make a choice on the day prescribed by law, the electors may be appointed on a subsequent day in such manner as the legislature of such state may direct. You have not had an election that was held in the manner that you prescribed through the General Assembly. Every person that has testified today, whether it's a fact witness or an expert witness, has given you a reasonable and rational basis to declare and find as a matter of fact that your law has been ignored and intentionally disregarded. You can make that finding, and you should make that finding, and you should, according to not only federal law, but the U.S. Constitution, which is our supreme law of the land, and make that finding that you are reclaiming your delegates and that you will then certify them and choose them, appoint them in the manner that you as the state legislature designates. That is your authority. And don't let anyone tell you differently, because that is our United States Constitution that was specifically provided by our founders. This is not a political question. We don't, of course, we love our president. We are here on his behalf. But we are also here as American citizens. And I can tell you directly from my conversations with the president, and of course the mayor can as well, that he cares not just about this election, but about every future election. We have to preserve and protect election integrity, and it is up to the courage, as the mayor said, of every man and woman in the state legislatures that see this corruption to act. You have the ability and the authority to act. It's just a matter of having courage. This is not a political question. It's a legal one, and it's an American one. Thank you.
Thank you, General.